Good people YouTube, I'm the watching it, and yeah, you read the title right. I think divers are better than chronographs. I got to thinking about this topic a lot after looking at my wrist time numbers and stats for 2021, because while I own and love 6 chronographs at the moment, it was abundantly clear that divers dominated, being worn 219 days, 60% of the year. And if you add watches that have some sort of turnable bezel, then that number goes up to 273 days at 72%. So in this video, I'm gonna go over the reasons why I think that divers are better overall than chronographs. And then at the end, I'll go over the advantages chronographs have as well, just because I kind of felt bad and I didn't want to, pile on a little bit too much on the chronos because I do like them. Yeah, let me know what you guys think about the reasons that I lay out, and also what you guys think about the topic in general down in the comments. So yeah, let's just get into it. So the most obvious difference between the two kinds of watches are how they time things, and in this department I think divers are far superior for everyday real life use. I mean, like, cooking, baking, doing laundry, or for me, driving to places or timing how long it takes to render one of these videos. Legibility is a huge reason why dive watches are more useful, and why I prefer wearing dive watches when I know that I'll want to time something or just anything really while on the move, kind of, I guess, especially while driving. And yeah, you're gonna hear me talk a lot about driving in this video just because I absolutely love driving, and cars and driving are a huge part of my life. I mean, watches are right here, and then driving cars is like right here, I would say. So if you start timing something, on a chronograph while you're driving or doing literally anything else, unless you look at the sub dial very carefully, or maybe even in conjunction with the hour sub dial, you won't be able to get a good read on it because the sub dials and the hands are so tiny. I mean, other than central minute chronographs, which are really, really cool. I mean, I really want the Damasco DC80, but those kinds of chronographs aren't that common, so I'm not gonna talk about them. On a diver, you can take a quick look at the watch and you know how long it's been, because you're dealing with an entire dial and the entire bezel. Divers, of course, aren't gonna be as accurate when you start timing over an hour, but most everything I do can be timed under an hour, or if it's been a bit more than an hour, then I can just remember which hour I started on. Also, only chronographs with 12-hour totalizers are gonna be more accurate than a diver when it goes over an hour. I mean, bicompacts chronographs usually go up to 30 minutes unless they have a 12-hour rotatable bezel. Then it's marginally better than a diver. Oh, and if you're trying to time something at night with a chronograph, then well, you can't, because the subdials and the hands in chronographs are very rarely loomed, and even if they are loomed, I mean, it's so small that it's going to be super tough to read as it is. So I've never owned a chronograph with loomed subdials, so the Speedmaster at night is pretty much useless before turning on the light. Dive watches in terms of utility are extremely versatile because you can use the bezel for so many more things than just elapsed time. You can use it as a GMT bezel in a pinch, which I have done back in the days when I traveled. I mean, some say you can't do it, but I mean, come on. I mean, I think pretty much everyone at this point, especially if you're watching this video, will know which hour corresponds to 5, 10, 15, 20, so on from there. You can actually use the bezel to keep track of hours if you line up the 12 o'clock pip with the hour hand, and actually you can get a rough idea of minutes as well, since the bezel is lined up to the hour hand and each of the markers between the hours is 12 minutes. Also, you could use it as a countdown timer if you really wanted to, by setting the 12 o'clock pip to the time you're counting down to, or at the very least, you can mark the start time of something in the future by doing the same thing. And I just remembered that also, if you wanted to, you can use the bezel as a compass, the same way that you would, with the Alpinist bezel inside over there. North would be 12, and then you just go from there. And finally, this is probably one of the biggest advantages, at least for me, is that you can start timing things in the past. For example, if you started driving or you put something in the oven, whatever it was, 13 minutes ago, or maybe more realistically, you can't remember exactly when it was, but it's been like 10 minutes ago. So you can just set the bezel, 10, 13 minutes in the past, and there you go, and you can just time it from there. Sometimes when I wear my Speedy and I start driving and I know that it's been 17 minutes because of my GPS, I have to start the chronograph and then I have to remember, okay, it's this time plus 17 minutes. you know, which is just an extra step for, you know, getting a good reading. And also on top of that, it just makes it a little bit more difficult to get a good reading really quickly. And after that's, you know, after you're squinting at the subdial. So this section isn't to say that chronographs can't be reliable or robust, because they absolutely can, but there is more chance for something to go wrong with a chronograph than with a diver. And that's simply down to the fact that, you know, chronographs have more parts in the movement, and more parts in anything means that there's just more things that can go wrong potentially. Also, if the chronograph is used incorrectly and the buttons are pushed in the wrong order, you know, things can go south real quick. And as opposed to a rotatable bezel, on the other hand, it's a pretty rudimentary tool just because it's a piece of metal and a click spring or a sprung ball bearing of some kind. If you somehow destroy the bezel, then you can just replace it and move on with your life. It's pretty simple. Next up, divers are obviously going to be far more water resistant than chronographs on the whole. I mean, in the end, they are made to be in the water, so your diver will be more than okay in any situation whatsoever. And I know that there are chronographs that are 100 meters water resistant or more, but the likes of the Speedmaster, the Breitling Navitimer, they're only about 30-50 meters water resistant. And also most chronographs, if either pusher gets pushed underwater or during a lot of rain or whatever it may be, then there's a big chance that water can get in and really mess things up after some time. So yeah, actually in the same vein, I mean, service costs or for a repair for a chronograph will be way more than a diver, since most divers just have a simple time-only movement versus something that's far more complex. When it comes to the watches themselves, you have far more selection in terms of dive watches and in terms of price points without having to compromise. I mean, you can buy a diver from, you know, Seiko, Citizen, and so many other micro brands for $300, $500 or less with a solid mechanical movement and a diving bezel. You know, at that point you have a legit dive watch. Chronographs, on the other hand, are popular, but there isn't as much selection, and there is going to be a range of price points, but with some asterisks. Sub $500 chronographs are most likely going to be quartz or mecha quartz, which I happen to really like, or it could be a seagull chronograph movement, which isn't necessarily a bad movement at all. It looks great, but obviously for the movement snobs out over there, it's not going to be the same as a Swiss movement that could be had, you know, for around the $500 price point for divers. Yeah, if you want to get into the world of Swiss chronograph movements, then you're going to have to jump up to a ETA, Sellita, Valjoux movement, which are much more expensive, and those will run you well over $1,000, usually around $2,000 ish or something like that, and they range up from there. Next up is a size issue, and you can find thinnish mechanical divers 11 to 13-ish millimeters thin all over the place, and that's mainly down to the movements in them being thinner just because they're simpler movements. They only tell time and a date maybe. However, when it comes to chronographs, automatic chronograph movements tend to make the overall watch much thicker, like minimum 14 millimeters most of the time, except for watches with this one ETA movement that I cannot remember the caliber number on it, but it's really thin, and I don't really know why it's not used very much. So yeah, if someone knows which movement I'm talking about, I've seen it in Longines, let me know down in the comments. And obviously things change quite a bit when you get into the world of high-end in-house chronograph movements, but yeah, that's just, we're dealing with big numbers over there in terms of price. So this is kind of a mini reason, but I've said before that I absolutely love LUUUUME. I mean, it makes me so happy because I'm a child, and dive watches pretty much, I mean, I would say the vast majority of the time they always have way more LUUUUME than chronographs, and a big part of this is because LUUUUME is an integral part of the dive watch's function, because, you know, it might get a little bit dark while you're underwater, but you know, you still need to be able to track time. Chronographs, on the other hand, can have great LUUUUME, but it's not always possible to do so. I mean, a lot of chronographs around the 40 millimeter range tend to have less LUUUUME just because the subdials cut off the 369 hour markers, and also the dial is just more crowded as it is. So yeah, and on top of that, the subdials, like I said before, are very rarely LUUUUMEd, so you can't use the chronograph at night. So all that being said, chronographs are still awesome, very awesome for their very own reasons. And yeah, I mean, in the end, if you want the chronograph experience, then you have to get a chronograph. There's no two ways about it because they are what they are. And I know of all the disadvantages of a chronograph, but I still own and love a Speedy and many other chronographs. And that's just down to the fact that I love the distinctive look and feel and utility of a chronograph. And it's a chronograph. And there's more interaction with a chronograph because there are different pushers to push. And then if you get a mechanical chronograph, then you get the satisfaction of the interaction, because it's incredible because you can feel things moving around inside being activated. Listen to this right here. Stop. And yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, turning a bezel is always really, really nice, especially when you get a really good chronograph feel, a really good bezel feel like on this Black Bay 58 Blue. But it's just not really going to be the same as interacting with a chronograph. And one of my favorite things about my Speedy and many other chronographs is just how incredible the movements themselves look. I mean, there's just so much going on in the back that just isn't there with a regular automatic movement in so many divers, and you know, definitely gives me a very special feeling. And finally, I think that chronographs are far more versatile in terms of what I like to wear with it. I mean, if I'm gonna be wearing like nice casual clothes, I like wearing a chronograph because to my eyes, I see them more as a perfect casual kind of watch. I mean, divers can work here, but to me, they always look to be on the sportier side of the spectrum. And that's actually why I personally will never wear a dive watch with a suit. I mean, on the other hand, I'd gladly wear the Speedmaster or a classic chronograph with a suit, and I have done so before. Yeah, so let me know what you guys think about the reasons I laid out, and you know, do you guys have any more reasons why you like more one than the other, or do you think the complete opposite is true? Let me know all that down in the comments. Let's have a good discussion, and yeah, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already, because that helps the channel a bunch. And yeah, until the next video, good day.